Bronze Age Mindset contains of 4 chapters and a prologue. You are now listening to the 3rd chapter. Click in the right above corner to listen to the full audiobook. Part 3. Men of Power and the Ascent of Youth. 49. Life appears at its peak, not in the grass hut village ruled by nuts-o-mammies, but in the military state. In archaic Greece, in Renaissance Italy, and in the vast expanse of the heroic Old Stone Age, at the middle of the Bronze Age of high chariotry, lived men of power and magnificence in great numbers. We are in every way their inferiors. Physically, spiritually and in intellect they exceed us in every way. I give example. Our elite athletes, our special forces operators, are nothing compared to them. We find Paleolithic bones, the femur, so robust that nothing from our runners or power lifters equals. These men were capable of sustained speeds unimaginable today. You know about marathon, but not the whole story. The real physical feat wasn't just the soldier who ran the 20 miles or so back to Athens to warn the people. The entire army arranged on the beach in heavy bronze armor, facing the enemy. After the Persians landed, the Greeks charged them from more than a mile away. The Persians were amazed at the line of gleaming bronze running toward them, and their war cry. These men ran a mile in very heavy armor, and also carried 6 foot plus a shen spear spike. They drove the invaders into the sea. And right after this great effort they marched, still in armor, all the way back to Athens without pause, to prevent the Persians from making an opportune landing there. I don't think any special military units would be able to equal this feat today, and these were the average citizens of Athens. Still more, they exceeded us the same way in mind and spirit. Their sophists were able to remember 50 names, and more, upon hearing them once. Some had the gift of remote vision, that the Rosicrucians pined for, and that the Soviet and American intelligence services have attempted to rediscover in vain. Here we have life at its peak. You know about their great art, science, and literature, or think you do. But these were men of conquest, exploration and adventure first. Aeschylus had on his tombstone engraved that he fought at Marathon, not that he wrote his plays. The free man is a warrior, and only a man of war is a real man. We must look to their lives and exploits for inspiration and anticipate with great enthusiasm that such life will return. I'm afraid that, in the end, the examples of ancient men of strong hand, ancient men of power, will be very discouraging to many of you. Because you can't easily replicate their achievements and power in our time, and also, many of you are actually sissies compared to them, in your blood. But I think it's good for all of us to remember we're panty wearers compared to them. Also, while you may not be able to emulate them in every way, because the age we live in is one of total repression, you can still take some inspiration from their examples and try to live the same in some way. Try to live according to a Bronze Age mindset. You must not misunderstand this. This is not self-help book, and I can't help you with how to live. No one can. I am concerned with the subjection of life and the suffocation of vitality. I hope to show you that things don't need to be this way, and that you don't need to limit yourself to small things. Above all, you must reach for the great aim, physical and military independence. Only the warrior is a free man. The only right government is military government, and every other form is both hypocritical and destructive of true freedom. You must aim high. Band with your friends on the way of power, and know that nothing has the right to stop you, and nothing can stop you. I say this especially to the military men and those who will become. Some time ago I spoke with another frog about Generalissimo Alfredo Stroessner. He was dictator of Paraguay for 40 years. He went to sleep at 1 in the morning and got up at 4 a.m. Aside from this, he took a 2-hour siesta in the afternoon. This is before air conditioning, and siesta is a necessity in tropical places. The entire day he worked relentlessly for his country and to keep down the vicious and satanic communist sect that would have massacred his people. But he also did this for his own glory. The frog says to me, yes, this drive is admirable, but you have to be specific. You can't encourage people to strive like this to succeed at World of Warcraft or at their career as an interior designer, there's no honor in that. I agree. But when you look at those ages in which life is ascending, the great vitality of their blood is the same as the great aim for which they reach. And although we live in the most debased of all ages, it's still possible, as you will see, to break this Babylon and have the eternal fire of youth surge you to the heights of power. In your own life you can break their power and ascend to a chaos of joy and destruction. And in our future I already see like faint image far on horizon of vast ocean and violet evening. I see the islands of Hyperborea, on the edge of this Leviathan, where we will be able to establish new outposts and subdue this great beast from the outside. 50. Imagine a Mitt Romney, but different. A Romney who actually was capable of acting like he looks and was worthy of his looks. Imagine a younger Romney who rouses the nation to a new war against India through power of charisma and speech alone. Then he leave on ship to head the armies conquering India. But then come rumors that Mitt ran a black mass Satanist dinner in New York. Also, people awaken one day and find that someone defaced the Holocaust Museum and the Lincoln Memorial. Rumors spread that it is Mitt and his friends in preparation to overthrow the government. So he is recalled from his command to stand trial. Instead of returning, Mitt runs to Russia, where he becomes a major advisor to Putin. Soon though, he finally has to leave in a great hurry when it is discovered he's been banging Putin's wife in secret. He runs to China where, again, he miraculously becomes a major political force and advisor, adopting Chinese customs and language with ease. After some time he leaves China and ends up living in Afghanistan with the tribesmen as one of them, in one of their mud fortresses, where he is finally found by American special forces and he goes out fighting, charging them repeatedly with machine gun in his glorious black and gold armor and dune-like headset. Exactly such, and more, was the life of the ancient Alcibiades from Athens. How inconceivable. Even as versatile and flashy a man as Trump is very far from this possibility in our time, though he at least makes such a type somehow believable. There's nothing like it in almost any other era of history. Someone like Talleyrand is famous for switching from the monarchy to the republic to Napoleon and back, being somewhat successful under different forms of government, and that's rare enough to make him famous. But that was all within one country. Alcibiades' achievement is made all the more amazing by the fact that different cultures at that time were actually different, their ways of life entirely alien to one another, and yet he excelled everywhere. I believe this is because in Athens, where he grew up, he picked the god of erotic passion as his patron. He was very beautiful youth, admired and pursued by all the men and women. He rejected the advances of the Pelasgian pedo-pervert Socrates, a story that Plato then inverted and twisted like the lying cunt and Phoenician Ascasser that he was. Alcibiades excelled in athletics, and it's cruel he refused to play the flute because it made your cheeks look puffed up and ridiculous. Other boys followed him, considering that the harp is noble, but playing the flute in music is something for slaves and cocksuckers. As he grew in power, his shield had arrows with a thunderbolt on it, and this scandalized the older men. In such way he showed that he was a disciple of the irrepressible life force, a devotee of the young god of sexual passion and total destruction. He showed that no law or word of man would stand in his way. In the beginning was the word. No. In the beginning was the demonic fire that bursts out in men like Alcibiades and lays low the cities of men and exposes all their nonsense. Such men are sent by nature to chastise us and be our nemesis. They are the great cleansing. His story is told by Thucydides and Plutarch, though you must know the latter is a famous liar. But I think there must be someone as colorful as Alcibiades among you. 51. The mystery of rigor mortis is very revealing. Why is dead flesh rigid? But study was made where they put dead rigid flesh into bath of ATP, the master of energy for cells, and the muscles softened and relaxed. The physiologically energetic state is the relaxed state. Flesh that is either rigid or loose is spent, but energetic biomatter vibrates in a ready repose. You see in the glowing skin of very healthy young people this relaxed suppleness in flesh, like Pietro Baselli. I've written letter to him to ask him to allow dozens of nubile women to touch his soft, glowing, full and rubbery like vibrating skin, all in public. The modern world exhausts, and in doing so it makes everything rigid or turns it into a diffuse blob. Physiologically it promotes the stressors, estrogen, serotonin, hyperventilation, overexcitation, the hallmarks of energetic exhaustion. Loss of structure, form and differentiation follows, which was the intention. There follows on this also a spiritual and intellectual rigidity, the orientation of the ideologue, of the social activist, but also of all our intellectual class right and left, as of those who work in the corporate world, and in most of the military. They're stiff and constrained because, in short, they live in utter fear that they will lose something. They have very little to lose, but they live in this fear anyway, and this is why, when there is a question of potential gain, or, worse for them, potential loss, they react with desperation, they freeze in terror and hyperventilate. Our politicians are all like this, and quiver in fear of the spanking hand. Everyone was already so tired of their robotic platitudes that they repeat out of timidity, and because they're all owned. Which is why a man like Trump, who seems not to care, and to find joy in this flouting and energy in this outrageous loosening, he seduces. The modern world is a killjoy, in short. But the ancient Greeks were quite different, and different also from the over-serious stuffy men with English accents who play them in period dramas. What they admired was a carelessness and freedom from constraint that would shock us, and that upsets especially the dour leftist and the conservative role player. There was a Hippocles from Athens, said to be one of the most beautiful youths. Herodotus tells this famous story of a man admired by all the world of the time. He went, with dozens of other youths from various Greek cities, to try to marry the daughter of a very important and rich autocrat in Sicily. This man decided to test out the suitors, to find which would be the best husband for his daughter. He put them up for a time, treating them with lavish parties, while he tested them in feats of athletics, wit, conversation, and other abilities. It's a sign of this people's greatness that marriages weren't conceived purely as political or financial alliances, but that their aristocracy paid attention to biological quality in pairings. Very few nations have the freedom from the fear I speak of, only a few peoples have had the sense to raise their snouts from the ground, look to the stars, and consider something other than the utility of immediate advantage in marriage and children. The way our own elite today marries and pairs off, by the way, is anything but eugenic. Two over-the-hill spent people in their 30s marrying for practical reasons. This doesn't give rise to strong children. The bodies of middle-aged people nauseate me, and I assure you, they bring nausea to nature as well. In any case, Hippocles was becoming the favorite of the father for all his great qualities, his illustrious lineage, his looks and his charm and conversation. At the last party, however, Hippocles got drunk and decided to start dancing on the table. Then he started to dance upside down, on his arms, moving his legs around. Well, you know that men then didn't wear the ridiculous constraining clothmo clothes we wear today, such as pants, so the father was offended at the show. He said, "Hippocles, you have just danced yourself out of a marriage." But the answer was Hippocles doesn't care. In this one phrase you have the whole attitude of this beautiful, reckless piratical aristocracy that colonized and conquered their known world. It's an attitude that upsets all the moral fags of our time, of the left and right. Hippocles went there to have a good time, to display and use his powers and excellences and biological superiority, but these two things are the same. He didn't care about the gain or loss of a wife. He didn't go to act like a meek beaten male ready to dance to some sclerotic's tune. He was as careless of his own property as of others. This is what Tacitus says also about the most noble men among the Germanic tribes, who lived only for the joy of war and battle. This is what the great among the Greeks admired. Another story shows you the same thing. It is also the attitude of Diogenes the Cynic. When Alexander the Great came before his bathtub and asked him what he would want most of all in the world, Diogenes told him to get out of the way, stop blocking the sun. He was just trying to catch some rays. Now compare that to one of our slavish intellectuals and philosophers, and how their meager spirits would huff and puff at the approach of even a mid-level constipated bureaucrat. How distinguished. The honor. Alexander said that if he had not been Alexander, he would wish to have been Diogenes. I don't know if I can recommend for you to be like Diogenes or Hippocles. It's hard, maybe you have to be born that way. I can tell you it's a better thing to aspire to, divine carelessness that comes from embracing the life force, and that this is what this great people loved. Anything truly great must have some of this divine carelessness. Didn't the Christians also believe in give us but our daily bread? Implying that this is enough and you shouldn't worry about anything else, even for the weak. Nietzsche say good things about poverty, independence, and being of good cheer. And these were very poor men. But the sons of God need nothing more. 52. Schopenhauer explains the carelessness and joyful frivolity of women by the fact that they live in and for the genius of the species. Although unconscious of it, they are full of its boundless aims that reach far beyond the individual, with his petty anxieties and cares. The coming of the next generation is the most serious matter. They live in the species. In them the species rejuvenates itself. It goes without saying I'm talking of women in the best case, and most specimens are botched. Why are they botched though? They've been taught to hate their own natures and instincts, and in some cases these instincts have been warped or butt-exed into something else. They've been, as a wit recently put it, Bernanke up the ass. Modern women have given up this great advantage so they can become neurotic copies of gay desk workers. They've abandoned the great power endowed in their blood. If you don't believe me, remember a carrier pigeon that knows the way. Surely he would lose his way if he saw a map and had to think about it. What comes from the blood is best. But it's hard to hear this call of instinct today because you're taught to distrust it. Abandoning yourself to instinct, once one has a discipline and practice through the body, a man can pass over a chasm on a tightrope with a sure step. The left talks much about letting loose, about no longer being repressed. If they only understood what this really meant. I will show you men who really didn't have any hang-ups, who weren't repressed at all. One name was Clerchus, and he was a Spartan general. He was sent by Sparta to city of Byzantium by mouth of Black Sea. They had asked for help. He came there as military advisor, but soon no longer answered to Sparta. He used his power and contrived to invite the prominent men, the senators and the rich of the city to a meeting where they were then hung by the neck. He took their property and took the prize of sovereignty in this place. After Sparta sent an army to dislodge him, he put up a great resistance and difficult battle, but was defeated. Then Clerchus managed to escape while the city was besieged. By night he sneaked away in a ship with the treasure from a neighboring city that he had also taken over. Eventually he fled to Persia. But in Persia he didn't just enjoy his riches, which he had won by the power of his hand. This man was possessed by the passion for war and adventure. He put out a call for many mercenaries from all over the Greek world and led this army through many bold enterprises in the wilds of Thrace and the middle of the Persian Empire, where, however, he died because of treachery. Here he was careless. You must be careful and know how to use the fox as well as the lion in you. I tell you of another man, praised by Machiavelli as a guide for life, a kind of life coach. He talks about a man, Agathocles, from the ancient city Syracuse, a Greek city in Sicily. This man rose from humble beginnings through the ranks of the army because of his great bravery in battle and his astute mind planning stratagems and ambush. Eventually he was appointed top general in the city where, again, totally uninhibited and unencumbered, he invited the full Senate and all the notables to a meeting where his soldiers killed them all. He took the prize of power in the city. Then with many struggles he defeated the Carthaginians who were harassing the Greeks in Sicily by landing in Africa and giving them bloody nose. He ruled securely and in great glory. I tell you these stories because they show the lives of two men who were similar, who knew how to really let loose, who weren't held back by petty inhibitions. These are men who really knew how to enjoy their freedom and who weren't limited by the opinions of others. What was slogan of last decade in America? Yes, you can. This is slogan of last decade in America, at least, and I see no reason why you shouldn't take this idea to its conclusions. After all, no one of the very moral wise men who rule that country saw anything wrong with that slogan. Surely they must want you to have internalized it. Please remember that these small people like Bill Gates, Zuckerface, and Bezos are entirely dependent men. They can't really do with their wealth what you think they can. For example, they could never just kill a man and take his wife, but even the ruler of the smallest African country has this power, this true wealth. When your happiness and wealth depends on the force of arms of another, you're not really your own man, nor can you enjoy the greatest delights in life. Clerchus and Agathocles knew this. They show you one of the ways out, they're really authentic men who went their own way. Yes, you can. 53. The Pirate and the Fortress. Work was never pleasure for me, nor homekeeping thrift, which feeds good children. But to me oared ships were pleasure, and war, and well-glinted spears and arrow. So speaks Odysseus, playing the pirate. This is motto, and life of the pirate. Do you understand what pirate is? Many times I'm asked, why the Bronze Age? Because it's the heroic age you see in Iliad and Odyssey, yes, but don't forget what hero really means. Thucydides says the men of that time enjoyed piracy, and saw nothing wrong with it, and this is true. And what is the pirate, but the original form of the free man, and of all ascending life? How pathetic, when you are told now about living life, or having a life. These people know nothing about what true life means. Compare the intensity of Alcibiades, that super pirate, or of what I am about to describe here, to the life you're encouraged to have today. How worthless the vaunting of these anxious creatures who live on pharmaceuticals, cheap wine, the rancid fart fumes of status and approval they beg from each other. Schopenhauer says that at some point in the past all animals were herbivores, but then some species decided to take its own life in its jaws, to risk itself, and with great daring, become a beast of prey, living off the hunt. The predator is always the more intelligent animal. In every decision to become a hunter or pirate, a man or a people is showing great daring and embarking on great freedom. Hero is not slave to the many, who sacrifices himself for them. The common man is awed by this kind of sacrifice, because they would never do this for themselves or others. But this is hero reduced to faithful dog. Wolf seeks not to sacrifice anything, but to discharge its powers over territory. We take the wolves and lions, and leopards from among us when pups, and break them with false ideas, vicious conditioning, and lately, drugs that would have lobotomized a Da Vinci, an Alexander, a Frederick the Great out of existence in his youth. Then the energy that remains to them is channeled into mindless work for money. Labor and commerce are the ways to subject you to mere life and its preservation. When the superior are corrupted to a life of work and finance, they slowly move for their own destruction in the long run. I could say leisure is the source of all great things. The preservation of life is tedious. Freedom from its demands is needed for all high science, art, and literature as well, and also all beautiful living, all adventures, all development of your body to the heights of beauty. One of the reasons the modern world has no great culture is because the sons of the rich have such bad conscience about not working, they all strive the same as others, to climb on top of each other in normie jobs. Just 50 years ago most used to list sportsmen as their main profession. That was in a recent time with slightly more beauty and more art. But, it is wrong to look at this aspect of life, because it assumes we have more familiarity with it than we do. It's not just that we don't deserve to have a higher culture, although it's that as well, but that the purpose of such a thing is completely alien to us. From the point of view of real culture and refinement, we're as barbaric as the most obscure herd of the Khwarizm, where the women scratch their pubes in public. We're just more tame and insipid than they were. So when I mention leisure, don't imagine I mean by it what you mean by it. It's not just leisure, you don't need just leisure for higher life, but specifically leisure for preparation for war. To escape the subjection of our time, you can't really look to science or art any longer. You have forgotten their purpose. They've been deafened and almost all participation in these today amounts to a kind of cargo cultism. Who can even think of a true scientist or artist among us? I think there is maybe a century since one existed. Just see how Cellini crafted his Perseus, in what frame of mind he was, and how foreign this is from our artist diddlers. Paglia says the artist is an obsessive, with a mind close to that of a stalker or serial killer, and she is right. Look at monomania of Newton, or character of people like Balzac or Baudelaire. Violent spurgs and obsessives. Our diddlers are diddlers because they lack all intensity and all faith in themselves and what they do. They're not even nihilists, they lack all conviction in nihilism too. They just lack intensity, they're pissed dry. This is why in this book I don't promote for you the life of the scientist, or artist, or writer, because in our age these degenerate to hobbies and ways to pass the time, and there's no value in this. People who promote these things, without really having a reason to, are just doing this to make you harmless and to advertise to others in media or elsewhere that they too are harmless. What past age is understood by leisure is very different from what we understand. Should robots relieve mankind of labor, there won't be any flowering of the intellect or the arts or sciences. It's not enough not be free from work, because the retired and the NEETs are like this, as well as most academics and many others, but all do nothing that's worthwhile. They've been reduced to a constrained and dependent state, and this is the problem. Constrained and dependent people don't have real thoughts. For same reason that nations without manufacturing don't really understand anymore what innovation and invention was for in the first place. So our science and technology too is just more diddling. Cervantes completed Don Quixote while in jail, Spinoza was a lens grinder, Diogenes was homeless, and many other great things were done by people who were poorer or in direr straits materially than people today. And yet one can't deny that the life of the average American is that of an overworked, overstressed slave. But the rest that would come from relieving him of that would be just that, simple rest, if it doesn't also come with manliness and sovereignty. There is no substitute for freedom and power. Not even the feeling of freedom of power is a substitute for the real thing. The pirate, the true warrior. Not the modern soldier in subjection to a high brass eunuch. He is the only free man, and it is this freedom, the primal freedom of the Bronze Age that some must recapture before anything else can be done. Listen to what Tacitus says of the ancient Germans. They preferred to win through battle the things of life, and considered it mean and petty to work the land and sweat and toil, rather than to get their living by their spears and by risking their blood. They otherwise spent much of their time in feasts and idleness. The noblest youths among them, if their tribe was at peace, would go to other tribes to seek out wars, because lack of adventure was odious to their race, and only through risking blood did they win distinction. This was also attitude of the medieval knight, the chevalier, the rittern, the riders who considered the life of the serf, of the community, to be mean and dirty, worthy of slaves and low castes and women. They were always ready to ride away to new things and new adventures of glory and danger. So you see, it's not enough to say such people were freed from caring for the necessities of life, they had leisure. It was leisure of a very specific type. The Roman aristocracy, as Nietzsche says, had the motto odium et bellum, leisure and war, these being the only right ways of life for a man of power and freedom. In Sellin's Journey to the End of the Night, I think he says at one point that his landlady, otherwise a modest woman, had an aristocratic contempt for labor. This was but an idle vestige, and he makes fun of it. By his time, the last flower of the Aryan aristocracy had been extinguished, as Nietzsche says. In French Revolution, a mass revolt of racial slaves that remade Europe and took it on the downward path. Then there was another peripheral aboriginal revolt in 1917 that plunged Europe into a civil war from which it still hasn't recovered. But in Sellin's book the main character, in his restless seeking in this trash world, he was looking for that hidden key, the true freedom into the expanse of open space that he could conquer. Where to find the frontier? There are many places, but path is not easy. In the nations, leisure from the slave state must be secured, and this leisure must immediately be used in preparation for war. In Greek city the man of power spent his time in the hunt, at the gymnasium, in the study of military history and strategy, in every way making himself ready for war. Many think of the Greek age, when they think of its spirit, they think of a kind of solidarity and soldierly order quite different from what I talk about here. They think of the line of hoplites and their discipline. They think of this age as one where the individual subsumed himself to the city and its laws, to the discipline of the ranks. And they connect this seeming egalitarianism to the practice of democracy in our time. In this way they want to flatter themselves. Modern man is then called on to make a similar sacrifice and blamed for his selfishness. This is confused. In beginning the hoplite, the man who fought with heavy round shield, tall spike and heavy armor, he did not come as a tool of the republic or a democracy, the way modern soldiers are tools of the slave state. If you want to see what the spirit of the Bronze Age is, you look to ancient drinking song, at the mess halls of Crete and Sparta. This is my wealth, my spear and my shield. With this I trample sweet wine from the vine. With this I am called master of serfs. Those who do not dare to have spear and sword and fine leather shield to protect skin, all cower at my knee and submit, calling me master and great king. This was real song. A popular drinking song among the ruling men. Such formed small companies of adventurers who, early on, took over the state away from the mounted aristocracy. Themselves equally piratical predators. Some time after they took over a state and established themselves as its rulers, they then submitted themselves to the rigors and discipline of a strict training program. But only in the sense that an athlete enters training in a team, specifically for making himself strong and ready for a task, and never losing sight of that specific task. When we see the Greek cities at their heights in the classical era for which we know this culture, ruled either by aristocracies or in some cases democracies, we see cities where such men have taken over and built a state for themselves, and for the purposes of training for battle and supremacy in battle. That same haughtiness and lust for physical power that you see in the song, that never left them. In the case of democracy the only difference is that the sailors are added also to the ruling assembly of armed men. And you can understand then the meaning of this ancient public spiritedness, which isn't that at all, but free men accepting the rigors of training together, so they can preserve their freedom by force against equally haughty and hostile outsiders, and against racial subordinates at home. Any racial unity of the Greeks was therefore only the organic unity of culture or language, but never became political. Such people would never tolerate losing the sovereignty in the states they and their recent ancestors had established to protect their freedom and space to move. But to draw any parallels to our time is absurd. These men would have never submitted to abstractions like human rights, or equality, or the people as some kind of amorphous entity encompassing the inhabitants of the territory or city in general. They would have rightly seen this as pure slavery, which is our condition today. No real man would ever accept the legitimacy of such an entity, which for all practical purposes means you must, for entirely imaginary reasons, defer to the opinion of slaves, aliens, fat childless women, and others who have no share in the actual physical power. How is it possible for all to have an equal share in the state and a full demand on its resources when they in fact possess no actual physical force? And if you think this question through, you will understand also the nature of our subjection in this time. Because it is not these people who are at fault, but a hidden power that uses them as a pretext. Modern democracy is totalitarian and vicious, and tries to subject the best to the rule of the heaps of biological refuse, and most especially to the rule of those who can stir them up. The military men who constitute its external defense and its internal police forces should in principle never accept this condition. That they do, is a great question mark. How is it possible? To what end, and how did they agree to this? What's in it for them? The ancient life that I describe here, the Bronze Age mindset, is one of complete freedom and power. There is a hidden path for you also that remains. Behind the marketplace, it begins in the thickets of small woods. It winds up many steep paths toward the high mountain air, to life in the ascent, uncorrupted by the miasma of the yeast man, and the toilets in the river valleys. The life on Jason's Argo can be reclaimed. And by some few in the modern world, it has been. 54. Greek friendship. You think maybe I promote the ruthlessness of a machine politician with tuna-stained brown sport coat, or a petty office intriguer, or catty interior designer with upward lilting voice, who backstabs his colleagues to get contract. Fools, you think I'm here to promote a way of life or morality. No principles or ideas are of any use today, all will be retooled and taken over by people like these. Self-help is completely useless and not what this book is about. Rather, I would like most to go towards self-destruction and to be rid of them. I only care about very few who, being constrained in their predatory nature by this open-air zoo, must look to the past to understand what is possible. I want to give encouragement to some who are a certain way in their blood and to encourage them to become the purifying hand of nature. Among your instincts you will find the longing for strong friendships that the modern evil tries to snuff out. And they have good reason to try this, because every great thing in the past was done through strong friendships between two men, or brotherhoods of men, and this includes all great political things, all acts of political freedom and power. The modern zoo wants you instead to be a weak and isolated individual. In most Greek cities there were the aristocratic clubs or fraternities, which were always places of great plans, great ideas and spiritual ferment. Here were made great political plans, plans of colonization and exploration of new lands and new cities, plans of conquest, actions against the designs of tyrants and plebs. Where is your bulwark today against Babylon, when all this has been made illegal for you? In Life of Selene you see how different is a real free man. When insulted, or when one of his friends or family is hurt, he gathers 50 bravos for a raid on the enemy, something impossible in our states today, not only because of the immense power of the evil that suffocates, but also because you have no such friends who could or would help you. A brotherhood of men in this form is the foundation of all higher life in general. There is a certain madness and enthusiasm that exists also in a community of true scientists or artists that follows this same pattern. It is totally forbidden in our time. It's totally absent in universities, which is where science has been sequestered. But what fate can science have here? Everything in corporate labs, in universities, as in government labs, and at the military and intelligence facilities that still carry out some scientific tasks. Everything militates to crush the spirit of science. The dedication, severity, focus and enthusiasm necessary to sustain true scientific enterprise are forbidden because they make women and weaklings uncomfortable. The presence of lactation rooms and an environment where such rooms could even be built. The suppression of vigorous debate, the promotion of an unhostile environment of petty chit-chat and chumminess, the subjection of scientists to administrators, human resources cunts with fibromyalgia, to the crushing banality of everydayness, all of this reduces the young scientist to domestic muck again and destroys his aspirations and will. The assault is very heavy in Silicon Valley and other holdouts of research as well where, however, there wasn't any serious innovation being done in the first place. Already technology had been reduced to the development of dick pic apps for adolescents. Science has long ago ceased and been castrated. Will it be born again? The cleansing barbarism that I talk about here must first sweep the world. No science is possible any longer, nor anything else, in a place where all spheres of life have been submerged into the great mother of the yeast. But this isn't really about science or art, I say again, you're very far from understanding what those are even supposed to do in the first place. Do you know how for Greek all higher aspirations went into strong friendship between two men who together dedicated themselves to a higher task? In Thebes, Epaminondas and Pelopidas reformed the state and established a democracy based on the Pythagorean sect. That last part not important. They believed in some peculiar things, like reincarnation, the veneration of the left side, and also of beans and other legumes, which I don't understand so well. But it was they who established the famous Sacred Band, the elite military unit that broke the power of Sparta. This group was formed of close friends, and you will always have too much love and compassion for a real friend to waver in courage in front of him. But I doubt you understand what such friendship means, or that you ever had such friend. In Athens the two friends Harmodius and Aristogiton put down the tyranny through their schemes and their bravery. This is, you know, why all tyrants and totalitarians are suspicious of strong friendships between men. Most of all this is feared by the middle-aged lesbos and defectives that are used as guards by our prison states. And yes, I know the rumors that these friendships were sexual, but I believe this is misunderstanding and exaggeration promoted by the homo nerds of our time, for reasons I will explain later. The model for all such friendships was that between Achilles and Patroclus. Homer never hints such friendship was sexual. It is only out of the poverty of our imagination that we think it was, because we can't conceive of such intense love between friends without some carnal or material benefit in play. It was out of his friendship for Patroclus that Achilles embarked on his great rampage. It was for the sake of his friend that he would not tolerate living a long and inglorious life at home. He chose instead a short and glorious one, and a violent death full of promise and beauty. Friends can spur you to this. How shameful to drag out life like a dog and die overseen by strangers in a hospital who hate you, rather than to die in the prime of your youth for the sake of your friend and to leave behind a beautiful corpse. The original form for all this was the divine pair of charioteers. Castor and Pollux, or for the Aryans it was the Ashvin twins, and for the Saxons it was Horst and Hengist, the pair of the chariot driver and the archer. Do you understand this is the real root of all the higher aspirations of Europe? The charioteers who took over Europe around 1500 BC depended on this close bond between two men for its military organization. And probably this people itself had its ultimate origins in friendships of this kind. The Spartan state, in any case, entirely depended in its education of youth on this pairing of two friends, as knight and squire. It was this conquering aristocracy that really made Europe stand out from the morass that the rest of the world has always been stuck in. And for the Greeks and all great men of the Bronze Age, and not just the Greeks, friendship wasn't just a way to temper the lust for power and adventure that some of you will surely embrace, but an absolute prerequisite for it. It is most of all not a duty. Friendship is a social relation of a kind that is beyond all ethics you see, and if you ever think of it in terms of ethics, you misunderstand it. It is a great pleasure between two, very different from sexual pleasure between man and woman, but of the same species, in that it is pleasant and never feels like ethics, which is for cows. There have been a few attempts in our age to replenish this form of friendship, for example Montaigne's famous essay. There have been other attempts as well. You find some nice words on friendship in Nietzsche and Zarathustra, and then most of all there are the modern scouting movements that come from Germany and from this same spirit. The first movement like this was called the Wandervogel, but there were various others, all based on the experience of nature, the promotion of camaraderie and of nationalism. This included the Jewish Youth Guard movements that became Zionists, the Boy Scouts and others in America of course. Among the Jews, the promotion of this kind of camaraderie and friendship was a great miracle in the early 20th century because it so much went against their culture of the cramped shtetl, of nerds dominated by women and old people and by fear. It was a great act of self-overcoming for them, and many are right that in some sense the creation of Israel is the most anti-Semitic act ever conceived. It is, in any case, a great model for others to show that re-establishment of antiquity is fully possible, although there is no real reason why Americans or Europeans should have any regard for the welfare of this country. In their case too, however, by our time that spirit of piracy is long gone, and they've gone so soft that on the streets of Tel Aviv, you have Yemeni Jewish bluegums with Rasta style feeling up Ashkenazi girls, and in general a feeling of torpor. The condition of other modern nations is worse. In our time, friendship is made illegal between boys in school, real fraternities are for all purposes banned, and the scouting movements are forced to accept women. And women are destructive entirely of any great friendship. In private life, friendship among isolated and defeated modern males is unheard of. Men are deluded into thinking their wife can also be their best friend, and this, of course, also makes their wives lose respect for them. Then also so many are rightly afraid of the way such relations have been sexualized between men and are never sure if a prospective friend has sexual intentions. At the same time as all this goes on, gays act out a domesticized and castrated parody of friendship. Where to recover true friendship then? In this case though, more than in others, how could they stop you if you only learn to listen to instinct and follow the pleasure of desires? There's nothing in principle that the state can do to stop you if you should give yourself over to real friendship. All of the things I've said are a kind of conditioning, a very strong conditioning, but it's all a form of psychological control that should in principle be easy to break. All you need to do is give in to desire for great things. The true foundation of the Bronze Age, of the age of great adventures. Such a thing is a matter of the blood and spirit, and for those few among you who are suited to it, it should be as easy to recover as the carelessness that comes from filling yourself with the fire of the life force. You must only embrace your own instincts with abandon and understand that in common dedication to a higher cause, a great friend is invaluable because you spur each other on and keep guard on each other in the mission. 55. Superman mindset. Inside every noble Greek was an unquenchable lust for power, and this means power, to become lord over life and death in your state. It's hard to understand what this means from looking around today, because there's nothing like it from the big examples you might have heard. Many of you might think of dictators in North Korea, or some public lavatory of the world, or of the great total states of the last century, but you'd be wrong. These men weren't really free or powerful. In many ways they were hostage to their own security services. Someone like Stalin was trapped in a stream of events where his freedom to operate existed only in the realm of murder, and murder alone, and any small step outside of this would mean his doom. Ideology is so tiresome. These are systems of control that call on the mobilization of the entire society, and the demands of this control far outweigh the capabilities of a single man. In a monarchy he could delegate these tasks to ministers and concern himself with other projects, but someone like Stalin or Mao can't really do that. You must understand that all true greatness is parasitic on matter, for example the brain and nervous system are parasitic on the body. For anything good to happen the capacity of the hegemon must exceed the demands made on it for attention, management and control. The analogy here would be a body with a lower organ so large and powerful, their demands for control so overwhelming, that the brain would be barely equal to the task and would remain entirely in their service, although ruling or tyrannizing over them. That is the kind of modern dictator you know about. And the types of men that are drawn into this today are also quite different. They are the kind of ideological martinet you meet every day among those who are public-spirited and into public service. It's a kind of very aggressive schoolmarm type. This is a lower kind of creature. What I'm talking about is entirely different from public service, but seeks to live like a parasite on the state and on the substance of its various factions, to pursue quite different interests and desires. They have interests alien to yours. In the modern world this condition isn't approached by dictators of totalitarian states, but certain others I will describe soon. In fact the great totalitarian states you know about weren't that different from our own, or the liberal democracies. We live in the same kind of state, only that it is more prosperous, and the viciousness of the power is indirect and hidden. But it is no less monstrous. If anyone is free, it certainly isn't anyone you see or know about. No Greek that I talk about, in any case, would have enjoyed being the gopher of the national security and industrial state and its thousands of demands. Such men saw the prize of sovereignty as a means. A perch from where they could remain watchful over the state and of territory far outside it and swoop down like eagle for the prize. In one swoop the king of birds catches its bloody prey in fastolons. They were true artistes. Take, for example, Periander of Corinth. This man's name means literally Superman. At no point in his life as king of Corinth did he restrain his lust for the darkest paths. It is said he copulated with his mother, that he violated his wife's corpse, and much worse. He had all the boys on the island Corcyra castrated. And, having done all this, he was memorialized as one of the sages, or geniuses of the ancient world. A philosopher and a poet, he wrote an epic on the mysteries of nature that showed themselves to him alone on afternoons, when the long shadows make the blue-green shores of those seas whisper to ears ready to hear. He supported also the art and philosophy of others in the state, but only out of a careless generosity. I was there at his court, I played the harp, and he once threw a well-used courtesan in my lap with a gesture of disdain. It is true that he established his city as a great trading outpost, bringing great wealth. He also built the first railroad in history. A kind of way to transport goods across the Isthmus of Corinth, at the time a great innovation. He did many other such things. He established colonies abroad, he built temples, he chastised the nobles and raised up the middle classes, but you must forgive these acts, or rather, not misunderstand them. He never did any of this for the good out of duty or necessity, but rather these actions flowed from those we consider vices, as a kind of excess. Everything came from his instincts to conquer and expand the domain of his action. Born to power in his state, he could have chosen a middle course. If he had excessively enjoyed honors, or prestige, or security. These were his to have, and easily. The great danger for a house passes once the son is able to succeed the father in seat of king. But he gave all this up, for really no reason. He chose a path of adventure, but he chose even a path of sorrow. In all he did, there was a kind of artistic sorrow and grotesque misfortune that he seemed to want to bring on himself. To make life interesting, or so he could overcome even this latest outrage. He killed his own wife, and I know why. She was pregnant, and though he had copulated with her, in a dream he received word that during the act a small snake had become attached to his member. And that a monster would be born. Then it said that his son was murdered by those same people from Corcyra that Periander had made the subjects of his weird experiments, but that they did so because they loved the youth. But this is absurd. The real reason was that he was trying to impregnate all the women on the island. So Periander dreamt he would become progenitor of a brood of snakes. He only ever saw political office as a means to self-overcoming and self-perfection, as a way to turn himself into a living work of art. From this came for the citizens much good and also much bad. It has to be expected that such men will appear as monsters to others. In any case, the things he did were hardly the worst. One other man I can think of, a tyrant or a king, have it what you will, he married off the women of his state to slaves. Through this overturning of values that he learned from Plato, he secured his infamy and power. Do you understand what Plato's Republic means? It is a formula for such men to unleash their complete madness on the world. It teaches them certain tricks to expand the domain of their struggle for self-perfection into every area of social life. Plato himself says that the secret desire of every Greek was to become a tyrant, and Nietzsche understands all the greatness of that people, their exploration of the seas and limits of the world, their foundation of the arts and sciences. All of this as just an extension of this secret desire in the heart of every noble Greek. It was the secret desire also in the heart of the great French artists, and it is simply put, the unlearnable desire behind all great things. If you have it you must by no means restrain it. This is because human nature is feeble and easily led astray, and only when driven by this kind of monstrous and single-minded obsession for the heights of power, can it find the motivation to overcome the lying, dirty ape in us. A certain distance too from oneself is necessary. A clinical eye in regards to oneself, one's faults, is required for this mindset. In our time this can be achieved in part by embracing spirit of true science, whereas for man of Bronze Age. It was easy to embrace because he saw things that happened to him, including the great motions of the spirit, the feelings that troubled him, as instantiations of various gods, for which he was not responsible, and which he could therefore judge and evaluate externally. His view was, however, correct. For this reason, when you see men like Periander, you have to understand their special quest wasn't one where they try to accomplish the public good, nor was it some worthless desire to dominate others or exert will for petty satisfaction. They see others instead as tools or objects on a mission of self-overcoming. He was trying to turn himself into a work of art, his life into a replay of the great motions of the stars, or the secret passion plays of the gods. In the same way that the Greek state in general was conceived as a work of art by the citizens. Periander understood his position as king then as just another means. Here science, here art could be free from all limits and could rule unhindered and embark on great experiments. And yet from all this you see something very strange. The secret desire of every Greek, the Bronze Age mindset, was to be worshipped as a god. This is the secret target to which that boundless lust for power aims. There are many other examples. Among the Spartans you find the great general Lysander. He turned the Spartans from a land power into a great navy, defeated the Athenians and ended the Peloponnesian War. Then he went from city to city as a liberator, on a great tour of self-glorification. He was the first to be worshipped as a god at altars. He had searched for this his entire life, and it was the prize of his victories. There was another such unlikely man, Bresitas, a Spartan general of a generation before Lysander, of very unusual character. He liberated many cities by his force of personality and the magical charisma that emanated from his body. A Spartan and man of battle and the science of war, he nevertheless managed to win by persuasion and speech. Only such man, with disdain for words, can really understand what speech is really for. He was type of man who, when his back is against the wall, the strong spirit in him rallies like wild boar, who rages in his thick chest when he is cornered by hunters, and charges for the kill. In same way Bresitas performed best when he relieved many cities of siege. He died the most glorious death, in the middle of victorious battle, when he rushed into the thick of the enemy with his elite guard. He was worshipped as a god thereafter in the city of Amphipolis. It's not a surprise that you see men of this type of man come out of Sparta. The place that made the sternest demands on itself produced also the most brilliant men. They went rogue and easily imposed the intensity of their magic charisma on foreigners. True power needs no effort. It draws all around it like a force field. Power of character and body attracts others in orbit as if by magic. 56. In Iliad you see the greatest warriors rise up to fight even the gods. When Diomedes is about to go on his great rampage, Athena the wide-eyed appears to him and whispers in his ear. She reminds him of his father's great feats and breathes strength into his chest. She tells him to go fearlessly into the throng of the enemy on his chariot, and in this exalted condition, she draws back from his eyes the veil that had previously hidden the gods. She tells him that if that harlot Aphrodite appears, he has the power to harm her. And Diomedes does this without any fear. Even the goddess of love is laid low before the aroused might of a warrior on rampage. Achilles too in his great moment chastises the river god and makes him submit. This reflects one great truth, that in this condition of aroused spirit, the true man is given the gift of heightened perception and can see things that others can't. This is what is meant by the fact that the genius sees this same world we do, but sees in it things that we can't, much like we see things that dog or ant can't. Indeed, time itself entirely changes when the will is raised up to this height. The warrior in some way can be said to rise outside the stream of events in which we are held like prisoners. In this condition he appears magnified, anointed, and others who are not privy to the same things begin to orbit around him physically and spiritually. In the Bible too you see in the middle of battle for Jerusalem, the house of David shall be as God, as the angel of the Lord before the many, who subject themselves in awe to this great gift. In same way in their moments of great glory, Athena kindles on the neck and head and shoulders of the warriors a great fire that can be seen from far away. She does this for Diomedes and for Achilles as they let loose their strength on a wild rampage. A great bonfire explodes on their body and behind them. This is the irresistible power of charisma and strength that draws all to it like magic. For man this is no less true than it is for migratory birds on mission, for pack of wolves on the hunt, for hives of bees. In all cases the many begin to orbit around the anointed hegemon, as if by magic. It's a biological compulsion, and a great good. And you must understand one thing. The end of Achilles' mission was the total destruction of the city of Troy, the fire melting the brick of its alleys, its men killed, its women and children sold into slavery. This last was held to be the right of conquerors throughout the history of the Greek world, or at least for its vital period of ascent. Thus this most humane and refined of ancient peoples found it absolutely necessary nevertheless to have this out for the wolfish and predatory instinct in man. War alone brought rejuvenation of their nature. When Alexander drags the body of the rulers of Tyre outside the city walls from his chariot and circles around the city, he is copying what Achilles did to Hector when the city of Troy was annihilated. Nietzsche sees in this an excess, something unfortunate. But I tell you, he means something else. When city is destroyed its gods are destroyed. You must remember that each city had its tutelary gods and spirits for protection. The Romans, before they conquered a new city, promised the gods of that city that they would honor and respect them tenfold more than the inhabitants. When a city or culture is destroyed, gods are destroyed with it. The destruction of the cities in fire that the greatest warriors of antiquity took upon themselves was a form of divine warfare. And it was only possible because such men knew also how to listen to the voice of the gods and allowed themselves to be entirely possessed by a divine madness. It imbued them with superhuman strength and drew others into their designs by instinct. This abandon to nature and instinct. This is the Bronze Age way. And you can learn to cultivate this exalted psychosis inside you also. 57. I see no reason why, if there should be epidemics of all kinds of diseases, the same can't also be true for what we call mental disease. And you see repetitions of this throughout history and even now. Among primitives in Sudan, when they become possessed of fears that wandering Jews are spreading penis-modifying bananas, or that shaking hands can destroy your genitalia, or such things. This is funny, but in all eruptions of this kind of superstition, I see a divine significance and great potential. In Europe there used to be the mania called Saint Vitus's dance, and in ancient Greece, the cults of Dionysus spreading the madness of Maenads and turning the women into hungry cannibalistic sluts. I say this in sex-positive way. I believe any child born of such excesses is likely to be blessed, because here the genius of the species is allowed to make the choice without any interference. This is not endorsement of anything in our time. There is nothing like this, it's just LARPing. You've been abandoned by the gods. Only a global orgy of fire will whet their appetites for return. 58. You make fun of decadent Roman emperors. In the horror stories from Suetonius you have prototype of monarchy gone wild of mad emperors who use position only to satisfy arcane and criminal lusts. I don't write to defend such things, but the condemnation isn't moral. How can it be, when my reaction at reading excesses of Caligula or Nero or Tiberius is to feel a great sense of loss or envy at what they could do that I can't? Caligula had the genius idea to form a long line of ships on the sea, put platforms on top of them, fill them with earth, so that he could fulfill a prophecy of walking on water between 2 points. He gathered the army on the seashore facing Britain and ordered them, instead of invading, to collect seashells. He then called this a great booty for the Roman people and the Senate and threw a few pennies at the soldiers, saying go happy. Go rich. He captured 2 Gauls, but dressed them up in ice niggerface to look like Teutons, and then enacted an obviously transparent hunt to pretend he had captured them in front of the soldiers. Everyone laughed and rolled their eyes, for sure. But he was caught up in the story of his own godhood. At Rome he used to lock down the Colosseum during the hottest hours and withdraw the awnings so that the people would suffer in the heat and pregnant women wouldn't be able to leave. Sometimes he replaced the regular gladiator shows with pathetic fights between cripples and deformed animals. He would lock down the granaries to let the people go hungry for no reason at all. He was the greatest troll ever. When the Jews of Alexandria came to complain about civil war simmering in that city, he ignored their pleas and asked them why they don't eat pork. When you look at Elagabalus you see this tendency taken to its logical conclusion. This man was a trap emperor and asked his doctors to give him a sex change operation. It is believed he was a devotee of Cybele and, like the insane priests of that cult, wanted to castrate himself. Instead of this, he became a prostitute inside the palace and used to publicly give himself airs over how much he was making. Commodus became a gladiator and found great pride in his swordplay, although such things aren't so strange to imagine in our time. And they are to be welcomed. Nero was a pioneer of gay marriage. The first time he did it as the groom and the second as the bride. He made the old senators listen as he mimicked the sounds of a young wife getting deflowered behind the doors. Of all his exploits I found most fascinating that he put on the mask of a lion and, having tied up various men and women naked in his mansion on the island, came at them with the rage of a beast and in a frenzy bit at their bodies and genitals. I don't celebrate any of this, but I think when in our age elites are accused of similar behavior. This isn't right. I think we flatter ourselves. We want to think they're a lot more interesting than they are. It's easier to think we're ruled by demons than by defectives who would normally be running a smoked fish stand or running vodka parlors outside Minsk. We don't want to admit that we're as lame in vice and deviance as we are in greatness, and for the same reasons. You see these old wet rags of an elite getting arrested, and in almost every case, it's for something on the level of a Pee-wee monkey show, self-exposure in a porn cinema, masturbating themselves in front of some frigid cinema whore with leather face and bugged-out eyes, exposing their weapons of mass destruction to a Dominican maid. It's hard to understand what even goes into this kind of decadence, but it's of a different kind from the excesses of the worst Roman emperors, who, even when they were trannies, seem more manly and brave than our perverts. I wonder if it's not possible to think of history in an entirely different way. I mean, all we think now is from point of view of the people, and the story goes about progress or regress with respect to how they fare, or at best how something like science or hygiene advances, or technology, or moral responsibility, or equality, or inequality, or anything else you want, advances or not. But history would look very different if pursued with eye of connoisseur for superior specimens, judging them as you would prized steers or stallions. In such case you would have to dismiss these kinds of freaks like the emperors I mentioned and judge them defective, but for entirely different reasons. You would learn to see history from view of life and biology as great bestiary and learn what is necessary in our time also to make way for the long-lost tropics and jungle. The abode of the gods. That can return. And return. 59. I always loved the statues of the Kauroi. I can safely say that upon viewing such statue by myself for 3 hours, someone let me in to look alone in museum, I was able to ejaculate without touching myself. But I had no dirty or untoward thoughts the entire time. This experience made me wonder if it is possible to ejaculate without touching yourself. Is it possible also to will yourself to death just the same, without doing anything? The Kauroi have long story behind them, you might have heard. At first these statues were copied from Egyptian models, but they became much more realistic in the hands of the craftsmen of the archaic Greeks, also much brawnier and more muscular. The pose is still stylized, and the smile they have on their face is very enigmatic, almost like you think they could crush big stone on your head, or run iron blade through your sternum, and have that stony, autistic smile unchanged while looking you in the eye. 2 brothers of this type had to carry their mother to a religious feast. It is story of Cleobus and Bidon. Twins. She couldn't get there on her own, so they carried her on a kind of palanquin, rushing with great force up the steps to the temple. They presented her in time to the sacred procession, but both died from the great exertion. Herodotus as Solon told this story to Croesus of Lydia, who was one of the first self-made kings we know from history. Croesus took his state by force, with the help of a company of elite warriors. He was the one who made the first coins to pay his mercs. He ruled outside all limits and pursued the way of power. In this he inspired many to similar actions. But Solon, the wise founding father of Athens, you could say, a famous lawgiver, went to visit him. He asked Solon to tell him about people who lived a happy life, and Solon told him this story of the brothers. The full story says that after the twins performed this great athletic feat and delivered their mother in time to the sacred feast, she asked the goddess Hera, to which she was dear, for a great reward. And the goddess gave this reward, that the twin sons would lie down in the temple for a deep sleep and never awake. This is idea of a Greek. Of a happy life. This story confused Croesus the king, and it probably confuses you. It's strange to see how far the Greeks took aesthetic understanding of life and the world. There is no moral lesson in this story at all. Any moral lesson that you could think of, for example of duty to parents or to tradition, could have been made in different way. What's unusual here is the ending. There is just biology. It is best for the end and the acme to coincide. A beautiful death at the right time is the only key to understanding a life, its only hidden meaning. It is a beautiful death to die after accomplishing a great feat for the glory of one's city, family and for the gods, but it's greater still to die in one's prime, at the height of your powers, and at the acme of their discharge. A beautiful death in youth is a great thing, to leave behind a beautiful body, and the best study of this pursuit you find in the novels of Miss Hema, a real connoisseur. 60. The most glamorous Christian prince for me was always young Conradin, king of the Romans and king of Jerusalem. He was unjustly killed in Italy by usurper Charles of Anjou with the contrivance of a corrupt pope. He came from an illustrious family. His grandfather was the Emperor Frederick II Hohenstaufen, called Stupor Mundi and celebrated by Nietzsche. His beauty was said to be resplendent, like that of his half-brother Manfred, who was holding much of Italy by force of charisma and arms, while Conradin was still a small boy. Upon reaching age of 13 or 14, Conradin embarked with his few, but powerful knights southward, to reclaim his rightful throne in Rome. He defeated the usurper, and then entered the city. Riding at the head of his column of knights in all their full armor, with the imperial banners raised high. This was a glorious day, all the people came to the streets to welcome their beloved liberator and showered the procession with many flowers. The outpouring of love for this boy was like something that hadn't been seen since the age of the empire, and this alarmed the Pope and all the sclerotic prelates as much as this boy's grandfather had, if not more. Conradin was just 13 or 14. But he refused all orders to wait and never listened to the timid counsels of his advisors who tried to hold him back from his acme. He entered Rome as world conqueror. Thereafter came a series of disasters. His army lost a great battle in the south, despite a successful first charge, and mostly through the inadequacy of some of his auxiliaries. He was captured by treachery, and then Charles of Anjou, with the help of corrupt jurists, found a legal pretext to put him on trial and behead him and a friend. You might think this is very bad, and certainly it would have been better to die in the middle of battle, but much can be excused by his youth. And it must be said that he never compromised or begged for his life. His execution was so absurd and unjust that it permanently discredited Charles of Anjou, the usurper. It discredited too this kind of papal legalism that must sound very familiar to you now. Still more so, it permanently discredited the aggressive papacy that promoted a man the people of Sicily and Italy, as well as most of the German states. Viewed as an arrogant, nearly autistic, and unjust upstart. This Charles was ever driven in his life by the hatred that came from being slighted in his youth by his mother and other relatives. He was a man driven by a sclerotic lust for power and crude ambitions, where Conradin was carried by the native charisma common in his family, by his beauty, his careless courage. He was riding to seat of world ruler purely through naive trust in his own glamour. Know that despite all force and treachery and contrivance, all public sanctions and honors, the people will not be fooled. They know the real man of power and can tell the difference from a deformed usurper. Charles's execution of Conradin was lamented by all Germany and much of Italy. Now the robots who run our world also want to be loved or feared and are trembling because the people don't respect them. They too, the nations of our time, seek the return of youth, of a Conradin. It seemed to the peoples of that time a story of the promise of youth, the beauty and purity of its intentions, extirpated by the old and ugly. So that in the end the memory of the young prince was victorious. Not long after this the peoples of Sicily conspired with the House of Aragon, ruled by relatives of Conradin, and broke the power of Charles in a revolt. This was the end of idea of universal monarchy through the papacy. And this was the beginning of the national consciousness in Europe. The memory of Conradin was prized as the promise of beauty and youth, memorialized in epics and poetry, that rejuvenated the peoples of Europe and awoke them. Though he died without achieving his goal, he died as a martyr for Europe against Asia, and inspired the birth of the new state. The springboard of world conquest that was soon to come in the age of exploration and colonization. Christianity is a versatile faith, capable of many interpretations. I believe Conradin was the most Christian prince, but also might as well have been the renewed avatar of Apollo in Europe, recalling very old memories. It was the spirit of fire and youth renewing the peoples through its magnetic power, and then through the sacrifice of its blood. In moments of torpor we can always return to this spirit of the ancient Greeks as a tonic. 61. Crusaders like Cortez and Pizarro, Fernando de Soto, Drake, and Raleigh, Magellan, and Balboa equal in daring, intelligence, magnitude of spirit, resourcefulness, and achievement any of the great men of the Greeks and Romans. The story of the heroic age of exploration remains to be told in full, and maybe one of you one day will make big book or big movies. I say also now. For those who seek to make a difference and have some artistic or visual bent, movies are the golden key to the minds of the many. What Mel Gibson does is worth 1,000 books or activisms for your side. Learn to make movies, if you can, and you can start with video. In any case, there is just one great epic that tells the story in its proper form, the great poem of Camos, a man born to piracy and high adventure. This man lost an eye in war in Ceuta against the Moor. He then lived as a brigand and vagabond in imperial Lisbon, getting into one duel and fight after another, compassing poetry, getting drunk. His mother saved him from prison, but he was pressed into service in the colonial navy and army. He arrived in Goa, and from there participated in many adventures, military and diplomatic, as a man of low rank but high spirits. All the while he was writing his great poem The Lusiad, and when he was shipwrecked off the Mekong with his Chinese girlfriend, he carried the text of this timeless work above his head to save it from the water. No one reads it anymore, and his life would make a great movie. But he is right that the voyages of these new crusaders equal any great expedition even from the myths and legends of the past. Here we have Jason's Argo made anew, and not just once, but in every one of these nations of the West. England's glory during these years might never be equaled again by any people. Even the kings of Portugal, who started the age of colonization and exploration, had English blood. The Gothic restlessness of the steppe shook in the lords of Iberia with a titanic energy. Before the great voyage to the Orient of Vasco da Gama, spies, and I mean just one or two men, went alone on expeditions in Egypt and down the Red Sea, into the heart of Arabia, fearlessly, incognito, to collect information crucial for the coming expedition. Perched on the beaches of the great Eurasian mass, these men went, in just 100 years, from sailing a few almost rafts that they barely knew how to navigate, to explorers of new worlds and founders of global empires that lasted for centuries. You must understand how amazing this feat was. There was no tradition of seamanship in Portugal or Spain, let alone France or England. It all had to be done from scratch. Do you know at all to respect the sea? If you've ever traveled a ferry on even a relatively calm sea like the Adriatic, on a windy day a large modern ferry, as big as a city block, it will swing right and left. You won't be used to it. The Atlantic has waves 10 feet or more as a matter of course, and these men were traveling on wooden ships with 15th century tech. You must be crazy to have no awe of this. For romance of the sea you should read Melville. Columbus is celebrated, yes, but there were others who were even greater than him, or at least his equal, and few know about them. They don't receive the glory they deserve because, first, many of the writers who could have done this were prejudiced against their strong religious faith and their piety. You see, most of the modern glorifiers of antiquity usually had an axe to grind against Christianity or the church, so they didn't want to promote these men or admit that the champions of the faith were the most shining exemplars of the classical man in our time. Even Nietzsche stays away from them and, in a moment of weakness, speaks nonsense about the superiority of the Aztecs. On the other hand, the church has been embarrassed about these men. More than anyone else they spread its power and gospel through the world, and even before that, they saved Europe itself from the Moors and the other threats. They're the direct descendants of the Crusaders who liberated Spain and other parts of Europe. The church doesn't want to admit that once Ferdinand and Isabella cleared Spain of the enemies of Christ, God blessed that nation with a century of prosperity and preeminence and gave it the foundation of world empire. But the church was embarrassed by them, by the conquistadors, by their cruelty and their pagan love of vitality and action, so it tried to disavow them while making use of their strength. So their story remains largely untold, although it's one of the peaks of history and of manly achievement. Few understand the voyages, for example, of even one of the most famous among them, Vasco da Gama, and how in many ways it exceeded the feats of Columbus. This man circumnavigated Africa and found the sea route to the Indies, what Columbus had actually set out to do, or so the story goes. I believe Columbus had some secret maps. Such voyage was attempted long before by the Phoenician Hanno, but no one knows what really came of that. The travel was difficult. When you reach a certain point of the West African coast you can't just continue to hug along it, you have to pull out to the west and swoop around. This is likely how South America was discovered. Do you know what starvation, scurvy, and tropical disease is? Do you understand tropical heat? Sure, some of you might, but know that off the West Africa coast, when a wind blows in your face it's not a relief. It's like a hairdryer going off in your face, non-stop. And yet he reached India, he found spices, he found monkey, he made the Zamrin submit with big guns. His investors made thousands of % return. Just 7 years later another conquistador returned, Almeida, with a great armada, that tore a swathe of destruction along the Indian Ocean. He burned down Mombasa, though outnumbered, because of the arrogance of its Arab rulers. Imagine the stench that must have wafted as far as Japan. This man defeated a huge armada of Ottomans, Arabs, Mamelukes at the Battle of Diu to avenge the death of his son. And this was momentous time. Space itself on our world changed. The great overland routes of trade were now outflanked by the seafaring nations of Western Europe, which from this moment began to dominate the Indian Ocean and the Pacific. Do you understand America had a great destiny in this design as well? When the colonists founded Jamestown, let's say there were no more than 200 or 250 years from that act to the time of Commodore Perry. The American people had tamed the continent and pushed their way to Asia across the seas in no time at all. It would have happened even faster if they hadn't been hampered by the domination of England. Once they gained their independence their expansion was very fast. The Constitution, the ideology, the doctrine of rights, is all so much nonsense and has nothing to do with any of this. It barely all even lasted through the lifetimes of the founders of America, who were seeking merely dominion and freedom of space to expand. The great destiny of America had always been the conquest of the Far East and the domination of China, which obsessed the leading minds of that time. All of this has now been forgotten, and America's great fate has been thwarted at least for now. What do you know then of men like this, or of Afonso de Albuquerque who followed Almeida, who captured Hormuz and Muscat with 7 ships, who opened the way to the Spice Islands of legend? I prefer as usual not to talk of such men. They are so far from your possibilities that the example is almost depressing. I want to encourage you again with someone else from this age, a man more to my taste, and more within the realm of what is possible, of what is about to become possible again. This is the brilliant right-hand man of Cortés, Pedro de Alvarado. He was a man of knightly family from southern Spain, but had fiery red blonde hair, which amazed the Mexicas. They believed he was a child of the sun and called him Tenorio, the mane of the sun. He was of boundless courage, carelessness, and also boundless cruelty. Cortés left him in charge briefly in Tenochtitlan, where he massacred all the Aztec nobles in the Great Temple during a banquet for no reason at all. During the battles he distinguished himself by insane charges into the thick of the enemy, by which he was outnumbered by hundreds to 1. Yet he never lost heart, he went right for their garish flower-decorated lieutenants and cut them down, striking fear into the multitude. Don't believe the lies about gunpowder. Guns were very basic at this time, and on many occasions the Spanish didn't have guns at all. The armor, the pikes, the Toledo steel blades, the discipline and know-how from decades of fighting the Moor, all of this was far more important. And above all, bravery and daring, the same that led Pizarro to take down an empire with a retinue of 13 men. What I want to say about Alvarado, though, is this. Once conquests were made, he never stopped. His thirst for space, for new worlds, for new conquests, was without end. In his letters you see this is his only interest. Though made governor of a huge area, the present-day states of Guatemala, of Honduras, these are his creations, he nevertheless showed no interest at all in ruling them. He squeezed them of whatever money he could, never paying any taxes back to Spain, and always planned new adventures and new conquests. This man was a born pirate. Right before his death he was planning a great expedition for the conquest of China and the Spice Islands. Alvarado was a nemesis to civilization, and this is right and good. God sends such men to chastise mankind. I want you to be like this. To listen to these instincts in you. When he was put in charge of territory, Alvarado could have very easily settled down to the life of a governor, most men would. Enticed by the prestige and honor, they would play the part. Then also, their vanity would fool them into thinking that they could govern well. Well, maybe you can govern well, or maybe you can't. But Alvarado knew what he was. And he didn't try to be more than one thing. Be one thing. Single-minded purity of purpose is true manliness. He knew he was a born beast of prey and never pretended to be more or less than this. This self-assured sense of who he was made him insanely attractive even to the natives he oppressed and massacred. Despite his cruelty, they couldn't help being drawn to his charm, his lofty manner, his outrageous magnificence. They worshipped him as a god. The other Spaniards were in awe as well. You must see that nature blesses all men who have faith in their own blood, and in their instincts nature blesses them with such magnetism. Alvarado is the avatar of our new age, and I predict this. Within 50 years 100 Alvarados will bloom from deep in the tropical bestiary of the spirit. They will sweep away the weakness of this world. 62. Bob Dennard shows that the spirit of Bronze Age pirate can exist also in our age. It can flower complete and unedited. You have no excuse. This man may not be what you expect. How different he is from the pretentious bureaucrats we see, the politicians with their high-flown language, their tedious moral preaching, their careful self-positioning, timidity, and the drudgery to which they subject themselves. Men who embrace high-flown moral principle in public are usually looked down on by many regular people, they can smell the bullshit from far away. He started out as a regular soldier with the French in Vietnam, but he was court-martialed after he burned down a bar. Part of a dispute, you see. Some men chimp out by writing a complaint, others by getting in a bar fight, others by burning down the building. After this he wandered around Africa, finding odd jobs in the employ of local nabobs and potentates, all of them utterly corrupt and incompetent. He said one something like, "It's important never to be ambitious. Men of ambition are losers. Act and feel like a winner and good things, friends, and victory will come." He took part in adventures all over Africa. Coups in Benin, the Congo, secessionist movements like in Biafra, the French styling on English Nigeria, and so forth. His greatest feat was to overthrow the government of the Comoros 4 times. Each time France had to send special forces to the islands to dislodge him. Otherwise he would have surely become a hereditary ruler. He had many wives and won many properties by the power of his hand. At the end of his life. Well. This life lasted too long. He should have died in defense of his territory, younger, and without descending into the dementia and pain that took him in old age. France repaid his service with persecution, no longer needed to fight communists in Africa, his vainglory and ferocity became a liability. Now, if you need great moral elevation, if war must be in the service of a good cause, you can consider his service in Congo, in Katanga and then against the Simba rebels. At Stanleyville he, along with only a handful of other white mercenaries, freed thousands of hostages from rape and sure massacre at the hands of the savage Simbas. In many ways he defended whatever residues of civilization remained in Africa after decolonization. In this last venture he was joined by a man of similar temperament, the Colonel, Mad Mike Hoare. This is another great example of the modern rebirth of Bronze Age vitalism. And another example of why you're a fag. An Irish-English dandy, he was a gentleman among soldiers, but a man before being a gentleman. He remained throughout his life single-minded, brutal and cool-headed in the middle of conflicts where he was outnumbered thousands to one, swamped by the demented zombie hordes of the tropics. This man understood communism for what it was. The infestation of vermin he was tasked to exterminate, a biological event, not an ideological, political, or historical one. After the war in Burma he made a living working on safaris and then, like Denard, gaining experience in the service of various African governments. He led an elite unit of mercs in the Congo, and in the same operation with Denard, was responsible for relieving Stanleyville and saving 100 nuns and missionaries from rape and torture. Thereafter he led many missions in Africa, a new frontier. He was later involved in an aborted coup on the Seychelles. Failure is not dishonorable, as long as you are making a great gamble for great gains. It isn't right to judge such people by the justice of their cause. Some of you spurgs and almost all of the half-educated class think when Nietzsche talks about beyond good and evil, that he's making some grand proposition about there being no possibility to evaluate men or events. Morality is absolute necessity for the people. There is the other morality, that reveals a biological hierarchy. Just the same, a different standard applies to humans, and a different one to the true men who are willing to live in danger, and who don't care for their animal lives. Men like Denard and Hoare are a great attempt on the part of nature itself. They show that even in our age there are men who yearn inscribe their wills in bronze for the ages, who want their terrible creations to endure for centuries. They should be judged by what they were willing to risk in their spirit. And also by the unequaled rush they all must have had, inside them, as they pursued their high aims. Even just a few years ago Margaret Thatcher's son Mark was given a sentence in South Africa in 2005 for an attempted coup in Equatorial Guinea. He was ratted out and caught at the airport. You must understand that the meddlesome little cretinoids who run the West always put a stop to great plans and great actions. They've ended many promising adventures through their snooping. They're tattletales, always watching, never sleeping, always whispering. Gallant men, who live under the sign of the lion, are stopped before they can act. A different way is necessary. But I mean to say, don't be fooled. In our age 2 men of adamantine character exist, who fight like Capaneus before Thebes, ready nude with fire and armed to burn down city. They appear now as villain, now as hero to the people, but you must learn to forget just this desire of the people, and yearn rather to live dangerously, and do great deeds, for good or evil. The danger of our time is not that it makes people bad, but that it makes everything small and afraid. Neil Ellis in his trusty Me-24 Hind helicopter held off the rebels in the Sierra Leone Civil War, single-handedly, and saved innumerable lives. There's little glamour in his job, and in the end it didn't matter. But on his trusty flying hind steed he must have felt like a beast of prey swooping down on the enemy. He worked for Company, Executive Outcomes. A name that might make you think of second-rate consulting company in Office Park. But this was Merck Company that ended the civil war in Sierra Leone and threatened to establish a new order all over Africa. For this reason they were stopped by the UN, by gangs of international lawyers and financiers who fear the power of the new sea peoples. How long can they hold off such men from their destiny? In the Rhodesian War, you had companies of a few white farmers, raised in the bush, who ambushed armies of Zambia and Mozambique many thousand strong. They would attack with stealth, stalking them, inflict frightful casualties, and escape unharmed. Many such stories. Look up Niads on your raid. The potential for adventures and conquests like European man has rarely experienced in the past still exists, and I have no doubt that in the coming years such opportunities will become ever more frequent. The great Leviathan will falter, sooner or later. The coming age of barbarism will not be owned, as so many of you urban cucks fear, by the gangbangers and the unwashed hordes of the teeming cesspools of the world, but by clean-cut middle-class and working-class vets, men of military experience, who know something about how to shoot and how to organize. The fools who think oligarchs will be able to control these men for very long should look to the fortunes of the Sforzas and many others, and remember that money is no match for force of arms combined with charm. When Theodore Roosevelt was I think close to 70 years old, he went on expedition to the Amazon, then mostly still unexplored. He called it one last chance to be a boy. This expedition led to his death, and it was a good death. He followed in footsteps of men of power like Lope de Aguirre. And never lost the yearning in his heart for El Dorado.